Alright guys, welcome back to F1 News. A major update today on the big drama of this summer break so far. The Red Bull brake bias, inertial valve, cheating potential situation we've talked about over the last few days. Now it's being picked up by more areas of the media. Craig Scarborough, a very talented engineer in the space of Formula 1 for many years, coming up with his perception on exactly what Red Bull might have done to gain a major advantage. His belief is that if they were doing this, it would potentially have given them a major tyre preservation advantage, which of course is what we saw in reality, it seems, with Red Bull over the last couple of seasons. Does this explain the situation? Does this qualify as cheating given the grey area of these regulations? Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy, subscribe if you're new as always. Those who have been asking me exactly where I am over the last couple of days, I'm here at the Esports World Cup in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, so that's why my background is pretty crazy. For the next couple of days I've got this sick office set up. I mentioned it a few days ago, but obviously not everyone can catch every video, so yeah, I'll be here for another few days, then back to the UK. It's been a wild ride so far. Nowhere near Jeddah really. I mean, Saudi Arabia is a massive country, so I can't exactly go and just hop down the road to see the Grand Prix track, but nonetheless, we've got plenty to talk about today. Quickly on Alpine, they are going to need a partner, of course, to Pierre Gasly, who's staying on. We think it might be Jack Doohan, not the name that would have been top of list in theory. Of course, they wanted to look at Carlos Sainz, but Briatore is now saying it doesn't really make a difference who we sign, so that kind of sounds to me that they may go for the cheaper, more kind of less expensive option in Jack Doohan, loyal to the brand, stuff like this, of course. Speaking of other potential rookies on the grid, Gabriel Bortoleto has definitely been thrown around lately, and apparently, because he's represented by the same management as Fernando Alonso, he will be in the conversation with these Audi talks. So Alonso reportedly visited Sauber's motorhome in Spa to potentially get involved in this kind of like Bortoleto to Audi potential situation, so that's quite a fascinating one to keep your eyes on. And there's also been further talk about this, that the McLaren contract, could that get in the way? We do know that there have been various McLaren drivers over the last couple of seasons that have struggled contractually, not even in Formula 1, but we're talking IndyCar and other stuff like that. There's been quite a lot of drama with McLaren drivers, not really in F1 to be fair, although let's be real, the whole Piastro, as it's kind of known now, the Alpine to McLaren debate with Piastri, that is obviously, the time for that has been and gone on some level. Quickly on Audi as well, they had the drama recently, right? Mattia Binotto comes in, Jonathan Wheatley is coming in, Andreas Seidel is gone. Apparently Seidel, before he was effectively fired and replaced by Mattia Binotto, was targeting Mike Crack, of course, current team principal over there, and Aston Martin as their new team boss. That never happened. It's going to be Wheatley instead. Crack is going to stay at Aston Martin, despite the fact that their car has not gone in the right direction over the last couple of seasons, really. James Vowles as well, saying that Williams is definitely looking towards the future and saying that already Williams is assigning people to work on F1 in 2027, which is quite the thing to say. So I think for Carlos Sainz and Alex Albon and Williams, they're going to have to accept that next year is probably not going to be the best, but they are really looking to tackle the new regulations, hit the ground running. Whether they can achieve that, time will only tell, but that of course is their goal. Before we get to the Red Bull drama, just to quickly mention this, Mercedes making it quite clear that their goal this season is indeed to get third in both championships. Definitely in the constructors that is possible, they're probably favoured to do so right now. The drivers is where that becomes more of a challenge, right? Third in the drivers is quite a tall order, I would say, as it stands. This is the way the Drivers' Championship looks. Max is, given what he did at the start of the season, pretty much away and gone, I would say, in the drivers. Norris is seconds. Hamilton's down here at 150 and Leclerc is at 177. So on the current rate, will Hamilton, who is the best placed Mercedes driver, overtake Leclerc? Probably, you would say. But can he overtake Piastri? I think that's the question, really. Hamilton, I think, can definitely overtake Leclerc and Sainz, given that the Mercedes is stronger right now. Whether he can catch and overtake Piastri and therefore secure third in the drivers, that's another debate, I would say, entirely, but definitely interesting that that's effectively Mercedes' goal. But let's talk about this situation, because we talked about this a while ago now, on the rumours as to the performance that Red Bull had and then subsequently lost over the last few rounds. Now, there's still a question on this, and I don't think it's a question that has a clear-cut answer as to whether Red Bull regressed, whether other teams made progress, or exactly what the balance of that was. From my eyes, what my eyes are telling me is that the Red Bull car we see today is not the same car we saw at the start of the season. I don't have any, groundbreaking, evidence and data to back that up, but it's more anecdotal. It's on what the drivers have said. Verstappen now complaining of balance and understeer in the car especially. Helmut Marko saying the balance isn't the same as it was at the start of the season. And sure, while Red Bull themselves are not going to come out and say, oh yeah, we had to change X, Y, Z because the FIA told us to, Obviously, maybe you can read between the lines to some degree. Just wanting to share again, really, this was the performance advantage of Verstappen compared to the field in the sprint race of the Chinese Grand Prix. This is his advantage compared to Mercedes, compared to Ferrari, compared to McLaren. You're telling me that this gap vanished basically overnight, and that McLaren, Ferrari and Mercedes all closed that gap in the matter of a race or two? I don't personally buy it, because this was Spa, for example, a race that, let's not forget, Verstappen and Red Bull have dominated over the last couple of years. Verstappen here in 2022 was mind-bogglingly fast. He just absolutely scythed through the field with no problem at all. Effectively, the same happened last year as well. This year was not the same story. Hamilton on average was the fastest man on track, then Piastri, then Verstappen, then Leclerc. So people have been looking for some sort of explanation as to how what we've had over the last 7 rounds has been some of the best racing in Formula 1 in a very long time, with 4 different teams able to fight for race wins. Certainly if you go back and include Monaco as well, where Ferrari and Charles Leclerc won, and over the last few rounds multiple different teams have won races, multiple different drivers have won races. It's been great to watch. Nothing like last year where Verstappen was winning every single weekend. So we talked yesterday about this story where sources were telling Racing News 365 of this, what they called an inertial valve in the braking system to allow for asymmetric braking at the rear of the car. This is something that, it's not like a new discovery, right? We always talk about this in Formula 1, the importance and also the kind of the cool factor of engineers pushing the limits beyond what the FIA will potentially allow and into the grey areas. This is always a thing, and it's always going to be done, and I think it's cool for the sport, right? That's kind of the point of the sport in some regard, right? The innovation factor that's coming into play, the fact that the engineers are always pushing the limits of what's possible, but it's not like the idea of asymmetric braking. So when you press the brake pedal, the rules say that the same amount of force, magnitude of force, has to be applied to the wheels at either the front or the rear of the car. Now that magnitude can be different depending on the front or the rear axle, but between the left and the right side it must be the same. That's the rule, although Red Bull had a different interpretation of that rule, which has now had to be clarified, as we'll get into here in a second. Now, asymmetric braking has been played around with for years, because if you can brake each tyre independently, you can gain a significant advantage through the corners, on the exit of the corners, in terms of balance, and also in terms of tyre wear as well, because naturally as you're turning through a corner, ideally you want every single tyre to be able to have its own exact, very precise amount of braking applied to the tyre, because less slippage and stuff like this to preserve the tyres even better. I think to me over the last couple of years that was the standout feature of the Red Bull, was that the degradation just didn't seem to be there. Like, they were able to maintain their tyres so much longer than anybody else, and it just felt to me that there was something going on there. And this may not be true, but it is one explanation for what might have been occurring. So we've heard now Racing News 365, sources are saying that this is what was going on, and now Peter Windsor, maybe not the most reliable source in the world, but nonetheless we're hearing more and more people, journalists in the community talking about it. Looks as though Red Bull Racing might have been running a clever rear cross-brake inertia valve before they were obliged to remove it before Miami. This could explain Max's rear right brake drama at Melbourne and his turn-in grief since China, because if you can have a car that is beautiful under braking, it would really help a driver with Max's style, who really likes the front turn-in and likes minimal understeer, which is seemingly what the car's had for the last couple of years now. Now, there was of course some debate on this, because as Dr. Rob says, this rear right brake locking thing wasn't related to this, because if you had asymmetric braking bias, well, there's been some debate. If this brake system was in play, would it contribute to a braking issue there, or would it not? We talked about this even way back when we first discussed this rumour about exactly what had happened in Melbourne and whether that was somehow related. I think my perspective is it might not well have been related. My theory would be that every team from time to time has brake issues. That's just kind of how it is. And my personal theory is that this device was on last year's Red Bull as well. And it's not like last year's Red Bull had loads of braking issues, for example. So, they exist from time to time. And even Ferrari had braking issues in Bahrain. Leclerc was struggling, of course, with that. So some debate on whether the relationship to the Melbourne Grand Prix is accurate or not. What may be accurate, though, is Craig Scarborough's interpretation. So very knowledgeable, very capable engineer, and he gives his read on what this might be. This makes sense and is underlined by the tech regulation change, which we'll look at again in a second, a return of the Newey fiddle brake, but automatic and creating a turning moment with the rear brakes. There's even been some speculation as to whether after Newey departed, did he like tell on the team? I mean, I don't know, just a theory, right? But it was that weekend where Newey left the team and then immediately in Miami and therefore beyond, the car hasn't been as good. So there's been some speculation onto exactly who informs the FIA, because if this is true, this what we're going to dive into in the coming seconds, which people are starting to see that it may well be, certainly this would explain many of the anecdotal things we've seen from Red Bull over the last couple of seasons. If it is true, then it would raise the question onto exactly how the FIA discovered it, why they decided to put this clarification in place, and who found out about this, because it's not something you can see. The only way you'd be able to see it is if you took the car apart, or just looking at the characteristics of the car, which seems maybe too good to be true. I don't know, that's a theory, but effectively a way with a weighted valve in the rear brake splitter to alternate the effort between the calipers as the car turns. Just to quickly clarify, because a couple of guys pointed this out to me on exactly how they might have not misread, but read this ruling in a deliberate way such that it needed to be clarified, because the discussion is on the fact that the magnitude has to be applied on a given brake disc the same way. And a couple of guys are pointing out that because it says on a given brake disc rather than on the wheel, there might have been a way where they can apply the magnitude to the brake disc, but then have a mechanism in place that it actually provides a different magnitude to the wheel itself. And therefore, technically, that would not violate the way the regulation was written. A massive grey area, right? Because when DAS was a thing, the Mercedes DAS system, that of course was a big talking point in 2020, it was obviously ruled out for next year, but Mercedes were like, hey, this is legal, and the FIA were like, yeah, I guess it is technically legal, so that's fine, we're just going to stop it from next year. This is a bigger deal, I would say, because if this is true, the FIA are basically saying, no, that's illegal, but we just have marginally miswritten the rules here, or at least they've been interpreted in a way that we didn't intend, so we're going to clarify it. So that's a bit of a different situation, I would say, to DAS, but intrigued to your perspective. This is Craig Scarborough's interpretation of what this looks like. We don't know if this is true or not, and we'll see Red Bull's response to it in a second, but the feeling might be that there's some sort of valve in place which is G-force sensitive. So as you go around a corner, such as in this position right here, then if there's no lateral G, this valve was to sit centrally. And we don't know if this is true. This is just Craig Scarborough's interpretation of what they might be doing to create this phenomenon. But as you then go around a corner, you'll create a lateral G-force, which will change the way the spring dampers are operating, and therefore change the brake pressure that is applied to the wheel. Maybe not to the brake disc. I don't know. I'm sure the situation and the way that they were doing this is complicated to ensure that they can technically be within the rules. But this is, I mean, look, it's fascinating. This is engineering. This is why, in some regard, people love Formula One, pushing the boundaries. But I think for most people, they would say, hang on a second, have Red Bull been using this for the last 3 years? A device that no other team has been using because they thought this was illegal, and, well, it kind of was illegal, but yet nobody had figured it out yet because nobody knew that Red Bull were doing this until now. The question then is, how did people find out that they were doing this? And I'm sure this story is going to continue. I don't think this is the end of the discussion on this potential inertial rear brake valve that they were using, apparently, anyway. And Craig Scarborough even says in the replies, one of the big benefits to this would be tyre preservation. Turning is aided by the less loaded inner rear tyre, easing the energy put into the outer tyres. So, you know, again, we've talked about the phenomena seen in the Red Bull. Even I would say the characteristics of the Red Bull. There's a few people that were pointing at, let's say, Hungary 2022, when Verstappen like spun the car around and still won. There was a couple of overtakes he made that race where Verstappen was just absolutely glued to the inside of turn one and seemed to have way more turn and a grip than any other car could possibly manage. And, you know, people have looked at the Red Bull and thought, how is it so much faster than everybody else? How is it half a second faster in race pace? And also, of course, like, let's say last year's Red Bull, if it was using this system, it was the race pace advantage they had. It was not the quality advantage, right? And that's kind of Craig's theory, is that, well, because of tyre degradation advantages, this is a feature that will help more in race pace than it will in quality. qualifying, and that again explains the phenomenon we've seen with the Red Bull over the last couple of years. So it is a fascinating situation. The question then is, what are Red Bull going to say about this, if anything at all? And this is where this individual here, Calum Nicholas, comes into play. Of course, one of the most well-known engineers, mechanics, shall we say, not engineers, for Red Bull Racing. And he replies to this and says, yeah, this is all BS. Unsurprisingly, he says. Now, very interesting, of course, just to hear his perspective on this. Now, like, is he going to come out and say, oh yeah, you got us, right? Yeah, we were using it, unlucky and all this. And of course, he goes in the replies and says, like, I've been building the car for the last 14 rounds. Like, I know how the car is built and what's inside the car. And sure, that may well be true. Obviously, we don't know exactly how this system, if it's true, is implemented. To which point would it be, noticed? Would it be known about? Is he telling the truth? Like, we don't know. I mean, at the end of the day, a Red Bull employee is coming out and defending the team. Maybe there's not too much to read into it, but it is interesting because Calum's obviously a pretty well-respected guy, and he says the following: actually, the only reason why I care about this stuff is because really people should be just giving the other teams the credit they deserve for putting in the work and catching up. Not everything has to be some big conspiracy, which is of course the argument that Red Bull make and say, look, we didn't slow down, other teams just caught up, there was nothing, no problem with our car. To me personally, and you may disagree, as I say, what I saw with my own eyes this season tells me that their Red Bull got slower, but I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, I could well be wrong, and the other teams maybe just all caught up simultaneously, but it doesn't quite add up to me. So Craig Scarborough thinks that, this isn't BS and there's something to it, and Calum Nicholas is like, well, he hasn't seen the car, I've been building it for the last 14 races. So Red Bull effectively, or at least a Red Bull employee, Red Bull mechanic, coming out and saying, yeah, this is BS, there's nothing to it, we were not doing anything dodgy, merely the other teams have caught up, which is probably what you'd expect them to say, but still interesting that, this is kind of coming out there from an official Red Bull employee to say, yeah, there's nothing about this. Whether Red Bull will, I don't think they'll ever respond to this officially, but it's very exciting for me just to see where this goes next, because I've been talking about this now for several weeks, and finally people are starting to talk about it in the community, respected names like Craig Scarborough and Peter Windsor, and therefore it's probably going to be a discussion point when we get to the next Grand Prix. Like, people are probably going to ask questions about this because it's now out there in the media, and I'm fascinated to see what the official response might be from Red Bull, if anything at all. What might Horner say on the matter? I think I can predict what Horner might say on the matter, and whether Zach Brown might come out and say, hey, this qualifies as cheating. And this is again the debate, right? Because a cheating situation is where you're deliberately breaking the rules to gain a competitive advantage. That's kind of my read on it, and there's always a grey area on this, because if what has technically been done isn't breaking the rules, although I would say definitely it's probably breaking the intention of the rules. I mean, if Red Bull were doing this, they would have known that no other team was doing this, because they would have known that any other team would have expected it not to be possible. But they found a way that it was possible, and in some ways that's the beauty of Formula One. These grey areas in the regulations. I think what may frustrate many fans is that Red Bull might have been getting away with this, if you want to call it that, for effectively the last 3 years, which is obviously going to raise some questions on exactly the way we think about, in hindsight, what we have seen over the last couple of seasons compared to what we are seeing now. Even if you don't consider the Verstappen dominance and the Red Bull dominance and everything like this, I feel in some sense we've been robbed of great seasons, have we not? Even if last year was perfectly reasonable and fine and there was nothing, untoward with their car, and this is only a feature on the RB20, which is, I'm not sure I believe that, but even if that's true, this season would have been an all-time banger had this car been like it is now from the start of the season. But unfortunately it hasn't been, and therefore Verstappen's probably going to win the championship at a relative canter anyway. But very much enjoy your thoughts in the comments below. I'm sure we're going to get more updates on this, but it's just been such a fascinating story to watch unfold, and now we're hearing more discussion about it in the community. So hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.